My friend's mom changed everything overnight, and nothing was the same again. People always assume life changes because of something dramatic. A car accident, a phone call in the middle of the night, some huge decision you spend months thinking about. For me, it started with a cup of coffee. At 26, my life looked fine from the outside. I was finishing graduate school, working part-time, paying my bills on time. Nothing was falling apart. Nothing was really happening either. Most mornings followed the same pattern. I stopped at the small coffee shop near campus before class, same table by the window, same black coffee, same view of people hurrying somewhere they probably didn't want to be. The woman behind the counter usually had my order ready before I reached the register. "Morning, Noah." "Morning. Black coffee." I smiled, you know it. The exchange never lasted more than 10 seconds. Then I'd sit down, scroll through my phone, and pretend I wasn't checking whether anyone had texted me. Most days nobody had. There were half-written messages sitting in my drafts, friends I'd lost touch with, conversations that felt too late to restart. Sometimes I'd type something, then delete it. The coffee shop became a place where I could be around people without actually talking to them. A strange kind of comfort. One Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting outside after class when my phone buzzed. It was my friend Ethan. "Can you drop something off at my house?" he asked. "What is it?" "My laptop charger, I forgot it in your car." I looked at the charger sitting beside me. "Sure. Thanks, Mom should be home." I didn't think much about it. I'd met Ethan's mother before, a few birthdays, a graduation party, quick hellos when picking him up. That was it. An hour later, I parked outside their house. The porch light was still on even though the sun was out. I remember noticing that for some reason. When I knocked, the door opened almost immediately. "Hey," she said. I froze for half a second. Not because she was beautiful. Although she was. It was because she looked different than I remembered. Less like someone's mother. More like a person. A woman standing in her own doorway holding a folded dish towel. Her dark hair was pulled back loosely, there was flour on one sleeve. She smiled. "You must be Noah." I laughed. "You remember?" "Of course I remember." Something about that surprised me more than it should have. I held up the charger. "Ethan forgot this." "Sounds like Ethan." She stepped aside. "You can come in if you want, he's not here, but I just made coffee." I hesitated. For some reason, I always hesitated around people who were kind. "Just for a minute," I said. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon. A cooling pie sat on the counter. A clock ticked loudly somewhere behind us. She poured coffee into 2 mugs. "You look exhausted." I looked down. "That obvious?" "A little." I laughed. She smiled into her cup. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. That was the strange part. My eyes drifted toward her hands wrapped around the mug. Then away again. I folded a napkin into smaller and smaller squares without realizing it. She noticed. Nervous habit. I looked down at the napkin. Apparently. Her laugh was quiet. The kind you almost miss if you're not paying attention. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. "Thanks for bringing the charger." "No problem." I stepped onto the porch. Then she said something that stayed with me all week. "Tell Ethan I said hi." I nodded. "I will." She paused. Then smiled. "And tell him his mother still remembers your coffee order." I laughed. The door closed. I stood there longer than necessary. That night while scrolling through my phone, a new text appeared. Unknown number. For a second I almost ignored it. Then I opened it. It was from Ethan's mom. A simple message. 1 sentence. And somehow it changed everything. The text wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flirtatious. It simply said, "Thanks again for bringing the charger. I accidentally sent you home with my thermos. If you find it in your car, don't get too attached to it." I stared at the message longer than necessary. Then looked over at the passenger seat. Sure enough, a blue thermos sat there. I laughed. A few minutes later I typed back. "Too late, we've already bonded." Three dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Well, now I feel replaced. That should have been the end of it. Instead, over the next few weeks, we exchanged messages every few days. Nothing important. A picture of a crooked pie she'd baked. A complaint about a parking ticket. A photo of the thermos sitting in my university library. Tiny things. Ordinary things. The kind of conversations people don't think twice about. The kind that slowly become part of your day. One Saturday afternoon, she texted me asking if I could help move a bookshelf. I almost replied immediately. Then forced myself to wait 10 minutes so it wouldn't seem strange. When I arrived, she was standing in the garage sorting through old boxes. Sunlight spilled through the open door. Dust floated through the air. "You came. You asked." Fair point. I helped carry the bookshelf into her living room. It took less than 15 minutes. Neither of us seemed eager for me to leave afterward. "Tea?" she asked. "Sure." We sat at the kitchen table while a clock ticked somewhere in the house. The same clock as before. The same strangely comfortable silence. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I noticed she always did that. Like she was warming more than her hands. "You know," she said, looking out the window, "when Ethan left for college, the house felt enormous." I nodded. She smiled slightly. "Then he came back for the summer and suddenly it felt too small." I laughed. "That sounds about right." For a moment she looked thoughtful. "My divorce happened around the same time." The words landed quietly between us. No dramatic pause. No sad music. Just a fact. A real thing that had happened. She stirred her tea even though there was nothing left to mix. I spent a lot of time learning how to sit alone. I didn't know what to say. So I told the truth. "I don't think I've figured that out yet." Her eyes lifted toward mine. Something softened there. "You seem lonely sometimes." The comment should have embarrassed me. Instead, it felt oddly relieving. Like someone had noticed something I'd been carrying around without realizing it. I looked down at my cup. "Yeah." That was all I said. "Yeah." Because anything more would have sounded too honest. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It felt shared. Which somehow made it worse. Or better. I couldn't decide. Driving home later, I kept replaying the conversation. Not the divorce. Not the loneliness. Just the way she'd looked at me when I admitted it. As if she understood. As if she'd been standing in a similar room inside herself for years. Of course, there were reasons to stop thinking about her. Plenty of reasons. She was Ethan's mother. She was 20 years older than me. She had lived entire chapters of life I hadn't even reached yet. Sometimes I'd imagine Ethan finding out we texted occasionally. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing secret. Still, the thought made me uncomfortable. And yet I kept answering when her messages appeared. I kept noticing when they didn't. A few days later, I stopped by to return the thermos. When she opened the door, she smiled. "There it is." I held it up. Our time together was brief. "That's probably for the best." She laughed. As she reached for it, her fingers brushed mine. Barely a second. Maybe less. Neither of us reacted. At least not outwardly. But after I walked away, I caught myself smiling for no reason. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone had finally seen me. After that afternoon, something changed. Not visibly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I noticed. I started checking my phone more often. Started looking toward her house when I drove past. Started paying attention to whether the porch light was on. Little things. The kind that become habits before you realize they're habits. For a while it felt easy. Then Ethan came home. The three of us grabbed lunch one Saturday. A normal thing. A harmless thing. At least that's what I told myself. We sat outside at a small sandwich place near downtown. Ethan spent most of the meal talking about work. I nodded along. His mother laughed at his stories. Everything was exactly as it should have been. Then Ethan stopped mid-sentence. His eyes moved between us. "What?" His mom smiled. What? "You two text more than I text either of you." The comment was casual. A joke. Probably. But something tightened in my chest. She laughed first. That's because you're terrible at answering messages. Fair. The conversation moved on. Nobody mentioned it again. Still, the moment stayed with me. That night I found myself staring at a message she'd sent earlier. A photo of a burnt batch of cookies. Normally I'd answer immediately. Instead I put my phone down. Then picked it back up. Then put it down again. I wasn't sure what I was doing. Or what I was trying to prevent. A few days passed. Then another. The messages slowed. Not intentionally. At least not officially. But we both seemed to feel it. Like two people carefully stepping backward from something they hadn't agreed to name. One evening, rain rolled through the neighborhood. The kind that turned the streets silver. My power went out around 7. A few minutes later my phone buzzed. You have electricity. Her text. I looked at the dark apartment. Nope. 3 dots appeared. Mine's still working if you need Wi-Fi. I stared at the message. Longer than necessary. Then grabbed my keys. Her kitchen looked exactly the same. Warm lights. The ticking clock. 2 mugs waiting on the counter. You knew I'd say yes. She smiled. I had a feeling. Outside rain tapped against the windows. Inside neither of us talked much. She sat across from me while I worked on my laptop. At some point the work stopped. The conversation drifted. Books. Movies. Old mistakes. The strange directions life takes when nobody's looking. Hours passed without either of us noticing. Then she said something quietly. I wasn't expecting this stage of life. I looked up. What stage? She shrugged. The starting over part. Her fingers traced the rim of her mug. Not looking at me. I thought I'd have everything figured out by now. I laughed softly. I thought that at 26. That made her smile. A real smile. The kind that reached her eyes. For a moment, neither of us looked away. The rain outside seemed louder. Or maybe the silence inside had become heavier. I couldn't tell. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I noticed. Immediately wished I hadn't. Then noticed her noticing me notice. And suddenly there it was. Something neither of us could pretend wasn't there anymore. Not romance. Not exactly. Just awareness. Dangerous in its own way. The room felt smaller. The distance between us felt smaller too. She opened her mouth as if to say something. Stopped. I leaned forward slightly. Not intentionally. At least I don't think so. Her eyes flickered down for the briefest second. Then back up. A heartbeat. Maybe 2. The kind of moment that could become something else if nobody interrupted it. Then her phone rang. Loud. Sharp. Immediate. She blinked. Looked away. The spell broke. Ethan, she said, glancing at the screen. I sat back. Right. She answered the call. And just like that, the room became a kitchen again. The rain became rain. The silence became ordinary. But as I drove home later, one thought kept replaying in my head. If that phone hadn't rung, I wasn't entirely sure what would have happened. And that uncertainty scared me more than the answer. After the night of the storm, neither of us mentioned what had almost happened. That should have made things easier. Instead, it made everything harder. The conversations continued. The messages continued. But there was a new awareness underneath them. Like hearing a clock in a room you'd never noticed before. Once you heard it, you couldn't stop. A few weeks later, Ethan mentioned something casually while we were grabbing lunch. I think Mom's seeing someone. I looked up too quickly. What? He shrugged. Not seriously, I don't know. Then he laughed. Honestly, she deserves it. I nodded. Forced myself to take another bite of my sandwich. The conversation moved on. Mine didn't. The rest of the afternoon felt strangely off. I kept imagining some faceless man sitting in her kitchen. Drinking coffee from one of those mugs. Listening to her laugh. Knowing things about her day. The thoughts irritated me. Mostly because I had no right to them. By evening I was annoyed with myself. And somehow still thinking about it. Around sunset she texted. Walk. That was all. No explanation. No details. Just one word. 20 minutes later, we were walking through the neighborhood park. The air was cool. Kids were leaving the playground. Streetlights flickered on one by one. For a while, neither of us said much. We'd gotten good at that. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It carried things. Questions. Things neither of us wanted to say first. Eventually, she sat on a bench overlooking the pond. I sat beside her. Not too close. Not far enough. She stared at the water. You've been quiet. So have you. Fair. A small smile appeared. Then faded. The wind pushed a few strands of hair across her face. She didn't move them. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone holding too many things at once. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. She hesitated. Long enough for me to wonder if she'd changed her mind. Then, have you ever met someone at the wrong time? I looked down. A laugh escaped before I could stop it. That's a dangerous question. I know. Neither of us looked at the other. The pond reflected the last light of the evening. Everything felt still. Too still. Finally I spoke. Yeah. My voice sounded different. Quieter. Maybe timing matters more than people admit. She nodded slowly. As if she'd already known the answer. The silence stretched. Then she surprised me. I think about you more than I should. The words landed softly. No drama. No tears. Just honesty. Raw enough to leave nowhere to hide. My chest tightened. She immediately looked away. As soon as I said that, I regretted it. You don't have to. She laughed once. Nervously. I probably do. I stared at the ground. At my hands. Anywhere except her. Because if I looked directly at her, I wasn't sure what would happen next. The truth was sitting there between us now. Not all of it. But enough. Enough to change things. I keep trying to figure out what's wrong with me, she said quietly. Nothing's wrong with you. The answer came too fast. Too honestly. Her eyes lifted toward mine. And for a second neither of us moved. The distance between us felt impossibly small. One more sentence. One more step. One honest admission. That was all it would take. The evening seemed to hold its breath. She opened her mouth. Stopped. I could see the question she wasn't asking. The one I wasn't answering. The one neither of us could take back. What are we supposed to do now? Neither of us answered the question. Maybe that was the answer. After the conversation at the pond, things changed almost immediately. Not with a fight. Not with some dramatic declaration. Just absence. The next morning I sent a text. Nothing serious. Just a joke about a terrible coffee shop review I'd seen online. Normally she would have answered within an hour. This time she didn't. By evening I told myself she was busy. By the next afternoon I knew better. 3 days later a reply arrived. Sorry, been dealing with some things. That was it. No joke. No follow-up. No opening. The message felt carefully measured. Like someone speaking through a door without unlocking it. I stared at it for a long time. Then typed back. Then erased it. Then typed again. Eventually I settled for. Hope everything's okay. No response. The silence stretched. Days turned into a week. Then 2. I stopped driving down her street unless I had a reason. Stopped checking whether the porch light was on. Or at least tried to. One afternoon I ran into Ethan. We were grabbing coffee when he casually mentioned it. My dad's been around more lately. I looked up. What do you mean? He shrugged. They've been talking. Something in my chest dropped. Not sharply. Quietly. Like a book slipping from a shelf. My parents, I mean. I nodded. Tried to look interested instead of affected. That's good, right? I don't know. He stirred his drink. They're not getting back together or anything. A pause. But I think they're trying to figure some stuff out. That should have made me feel relieved. Instead, it made everything more confusing. That evening I sat in my apartment staring at my phone. thinking about all the things she hadn't said, the things I'd never asked. For months, I'd been learning pieces of her life, but maybe only the pieces she was ready to share. Maybe there were entire rooms she'd kept locked, entire conversations she'd never let herself have. Not with me. Not with anyone. A few days later, I saw her for the first time in nearly 3 weeks. By accident. She was leaving a grocery store as I was walking in. For a second, both of us stopped. The world seemed to hesitate. Then she smiled. A small one. Careful. The kind people use when they're trying not to make something harder. Hey. Hey. Neither of us moved closer. Neither of us moved away. I noticed she looked tired again. Not exhausted. Just carrying something. There was a paper bag in her arms. A loaf of bread sticking out from the top. Such an ordinary detail. And somehow it made the moment hurt more. How have you been? She asked. Good. The lie came automatically. She nodded as if she recognized it. I'm glad. The silence arrived. Neither of us knew what to do with it. Finally, she adjusted the bag in her arms. I should go. Yeah. Another pause. Then she left. No explanations. No confession. No closure. Just the sound of automatic doors opening and closing behind her. That night I started writing a message. Not a dramatic one. Just honest. Something about missing our conversations. Something about not understanding what had happened. Something about wanting to ask if she'd pulled away because of me. The words sat on my screen. Waiting. I read them 3 times. Then locked my phone. The message remained unsent. Outside my window, the night settled over the neighborhood. And somewhere in the distance, a porch light clicked on. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. Neither of us answered the question. Maybe that was the answer. After the conversation at the pond, things changed almost immediately. Not with a fight. Not with some dramatic declaration. Just absence. The next morning I sent a text. Nothing serious. Just a joke about a terrible coffee shop review I'd seen online. Normally she would have answered within an hour. This time she didn't. By evening I told myself she was busy. By the next afternoon I knew better. 3 days later a reply arrived. Sorry, been dealing with some things. That was it. No joke. No follow-up. No opening. The message felt carefully measured. Like someone speaking through a door without unlocking it. I stared at it for a long time. Then typed back. Then erased it. Then typed again. Eventually I settled for. Hope everything's okay. No response. The silence stretched. Days turned into a week. Then 2. I stopped driving down her street unless I had a reason. Stopped checking whether the porch light was on. Or at least tried to. One afternoon I ran into Ethan. We were grabbing coffee when he casually mentioned it. My dad's been around more lately. I looked up. What do you mean? He shrugged. They've been talking. Something in my chest dropped. Not sharply. Quietly. Like a book slipping from a shelf. My parents, I mean. I nodded. Tried to look interested instead of affected. That's good, right? I don't know. He stirred his drink. They're not getting back together or anything. A pause. But I think they're trying to figure some stuff out. That should have made me feel relieved. Instead, it made everything more confusing. That evening I sat in my apartment staring at my phone. Thinking about all the things she hadn't said. The things I'd never asked. For months I'd been learning pieces of her life. But maybe only the pieces she was ready to share. Maybe there were entire rooms she'd kept locked. Entire conversations she'd never let herself have. Not with me. Not with anyone. A few days later, I saw her for the first time in nearly 3 weeks. By accident. She was leaving a grocery store as I was walking in. For a second, both of us stopped. The world seemed to hesitate. Then she smiled. A small one. Careful. The kind people use when they're trying not to make something harder. Hey. Hey. Neither of us moved closer. Neither of us moved away. I noticed she looked tired again. Not exhausted. Just carrying something. There was a paper bag in her arms. A loaf of bread sticking out from the top. Such an ordinary detail. And somehow it made the moment hurt more. "How have you been?" she asked. "Good." The lie came automatically. She nodded as if she recognized it. "I'm glad." The silence arrived. Neither of us knew what to do with it. Finally, she adjusted the bag in her arms. "I should go." "Yeah." Another pause. Then she left. No explanations. No confession. No closure. Just the sound of automatic doors opening and closing behind her. That night I started writing a message. Not a dramatic one. Just honest. Something about missing our conversations. Something about not understanding what had happened. Something about wanting to ask if she'd pulled away because of me. The words sat on my screen. Waiting. I read them 3 times. Then locked my phone. The message remained unsent. Outside my window, the night settled over the neighborhood. And somewhere in the distance, a porch light clicked on. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. The message stayed on my phone for 4 days. 4 days of reading it. 4 days of almost sending it. 4 days of finding reasons not to. By the 5th day, I was tired of arguing with myself. So I drove to her house. No plan. No speech prepared. Just a decision. The porch light was on. Even though it was still daylight. For a second I sat in my car looking at it. Thinking about turning around. Thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Then I got out. Before I could change my mind. When she opened the door, surprise flashed across her face. Then something else. Relief. Gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "Hey. Hey." Neither of us moved. Neither of us seemed sure what came next. Finally she stepped aside. "Come in." The kitchen looked exactly the same. The clock still ticked. 2 mugs sat drying beside the sink. The blue thermos rested near the window. So many familiar things. And somehow everything felt different. She made tea. I watched her move around the room. Careful. Quiet. Like someone carrying a fragile object. Eventually she sat down across from me. Neither of us touched our drinks. The silence stretched. Then she spoke first. "I'm sorry." I looked up. "For what?" "For disappearing." The honesty caught me off guard. She folded her hands together. Unfolded them. Looked toward the window. Anywhere except me. My ex started showing up more. I nodded. "Ethan mentioned." A small laugh escaped her. "Of course he did." The smile disappeared quickly. "We weren't getting back together." She paused. "But after everything that happened, I felt like I owed it to myself to know for sure." I understood. At least part of me did. The other part wished I didn't. She stared down at her tea. I kept thinking about that night in the park. The room seemed to get quieter. I kept thinking about what I almost said. Neither of us moved. The clock ticked. 1 second. Then another. Finally I asked the question I'd been carrying around for weeks. "Why didn't you?" She looked at me. Really looked at me. And for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't hide behind a smile. "Because I was scared." The answer sat between us. Simple. Painfully simple. "I was scared because you're Ethan's friend." A breath. "Because you're younger." Another breath. "Because I started looking forward to your messages." My chest tightened. She shook her head. A tiny movement. Almost embarrassed. "As ridiculous as that sounds. It doesn't." The words came quietly. But they came. Her eyes met mine again. "What doesn't?" I swallowed. The truth felt heavier once it reached the surface. "It doesn't sound ridiculous." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Of every conversation. Every cup of coffee. Every text. Every moment we'd carefully stepped around. I rubbed my thumb against the side of my mug. A nervous habit. "I missed you." There. Finally. The thing I'd been carrying. Not dramatic. Not elegant. Just true. She closed her eyes briefly. as if hearing it cost her something. Maybe it did. When she looked at me again, her expression had softened. So did I. Neither of us rushed toward the moment. Neither of us filled it with promises. Life wasn't suddenly simple. The age difference still existed. Ethan still existed. The uncertainty still existed. But the hiding was over. For the first time, we were sitting in the same truth. No pretending. No guessing. Just honesty. She reached across the table. Not far. Just enough. Her hand rested lightly over mine. Warm. Steady. Human. Nothing more. Nothing less. I looked down at our hands. Then back at her. A small smile appeared. The kind I'd missed more than I wanted to admit. You know, she said quietly, you still have my thermos. I laughed. She laughed too. The tension loosened. Just a little. Then she squeezed my hand once. Gentle. Certain. And said the simplest thing in the world. Okay. And somehow it felt like enough. People think the hardest part is admitting how you feel. It isn't. The hardest part is what comes after. The ordinary days. The real ones. The days where life keeps happening while you're still figuring things out. A lot changed after that conversation in her kitchen. And a lot didn't. There wasn't some dramatic announcement. No grand moment where the world suddenly approved of everything. Just conversations. Honest ones. The kind we'd spent months avoiding. Ethan eventually noticed something had shifted. Of course he did. He knew both of us too well not to. The conversation I'd dreaded for months ended up being strangely simple. A little awkward. A little uncomfortable. A lot human. Nobody yelled. Nobody stormed out. Life wasn't a movie. It rarely is. Months passed. Slowly, carefully, we built something neither of us had expected. Not perfection. Just trust. The kind that forms through repeated ordinary moments. Saturday grocery runs. Late-night phone calls. Shared dinners when neither of us felt like cooking. The tiny pieces of life most people overlook. The things that actually matter. Some mornings, I'd still stop by the coffee shop near campus. Same black coffee. Same table by the window. Only now there was usually a second cup across from me. Tea. Always tea. She'd arrive a few minutes later carrying that blue thermos. The one that somehow never seemed to stay with its rightful owner. You know, I'd tell her, normal people just buy their own thermos. She'd smile. Normal people are boring. Fair enough. One evening, we found ourselves back at the park bench overlooking the pond. The same bench. The same water. Different people. Or maybe the same people who had finally stopped pretending. The sun was setting. The air carried the first hint of autumn. She rested her shoulder lightly against mine. Not as a statement. Not as a performance. Just because it felt natural. For a while we sat there saying nothing. That had always been our strength. The silence. The ability to share it. Finally she spoke. Remember how terrified we were? I laughed. Worry. She laughed too. The sound still did something to me. After all this time. Not excitement. Not nervousness. Something steadier. Something quieter. Peace maybe. The kind you earn. The kind that arrives slowly enough that you almost miss it. The next morning at exactly 8:47 a.m., I looked up from my coffee and saw her walking toward me through the cafe window. The same way she'd done dozens of times before. The same smile. The same familiar rhythm. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cinematic. Just someone I was happy to see. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lonely while waiting. I watched her take the seat across from me. Set the thermos on the table. Roll her eyes when I pointed at it. Some things never changed. Thank God. Years from now, if someone asked when everything started, they might expect a complicated answer. But the truth would probably make them laugh. It started with a misplaced charger. A borrowed thermos. A porch light left on during the day. Small things. The kind most people don't notice. The kind that quietly change your life. She caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. What? I smiled. Nothing. But she knew. She always knew. And somehow, after everything, that was still my favorite part. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories would you like to hear next? Stories about second chances, forbidden connections, late-in-life romance, unexpected friendships, or the people who change us when we least expect it. Let me know, there are always more stories waiting in the silence.
Make sure to like this video, share and follow for more, and subscribe to my channel. Subscribe to my